So in this video, I wanted to introduce to you guys the calculator specifically. And so to go to the calculator, you'll just simply go to apache.dka.com, which is written up here. And in apache.dka.com, it loads like this at the beginning. And we have the protocols listed up here, which you can download in PDF format, including the presentation that's been presented to the nurses and also the video that was presented to the nurses, along with there's going to be this video that we're taking right now, put into this section here. For the next part of the calculator, there's some important questions we have to answer every time we enter any data. We have to answer where in the protocol we are by answering these questions, basically. And so if the patient's already been transitioned to sub-Q insulin, then this would be a ideal spot to identify that and click this box. If the patient is able to tolerate PO intake, that's another ideal spot to and notify that. If the insulin drip has already been started, maybe the first time you use the calculator for a patient, it's not going to be started, but after that, you'll probably be clicking this box much more often. So you'll end up clicking that. And if the insulin drip is started but currently paused, that does happen once in a while. So we had to identify and let the calculator know that the drip is currently paused, because there's certain rules on how to restart the insulin drip if it is paused for whatever reason. And after answering all these questions, we're going to click this little box saying, please verify that you've reviewed all important questions. The calculator will not calculate and make recommendations unless you click this particular box. So you do have to do that. The next section is labs, where we start entering labs relevant to making decisions. So it involves the previous VBG and the current VBG results, and also the previous anion gap and the current anion gap. Then it'll involve us entering the sodium, which is uncorrected sodium, which means we can just take it directly from our EHR and enter it into our calculator here without doing any kind of conversion. Next, we enter the potassium, and after that, the chloride, and then the previous glucose and the current glucose. Um, and that could be from a BMP or a finger stick, depending on when the last glucose was and when the current glucose is. And then we go to the patient's weight, because this will help us identify what kind of weight-based insulin calculations we need to do sometimes. So you have to enter the patient's weight. You have to click here at the bottom if the patient is at risk for becoming fluid overloaded from CHF, ESRD, or cirrhosis, because this is a big alert to the system to basically alert the MD so that you can get guidance on how to do fluids if that is the case, that the patient might get fluid overloaded. Then we have to list on what therapies is the patient currently on. Is the patient eating, not eating? Is what kind of fluids is the patient on? You can click here and look at normal saline, half normal saline, and lactated ringers as the base fluids, and you can click the additives that the patient is on as 20, 40, D5 or D10, or is the patient already on sodium bicarb? You can click all of these things here. Lastly, you have the insulin drip rate. So if they're on 7 units per hour, then you would just type in 7 here. Or if they're on 0, because we haven't started the drip yet, we just enter 0. And lastly, you would click this button down here called Update Recommendations. And once you click that, it'll take you up to over here where you can see the current recommendations, which is it'll first tell you what is the current state of the patient. Is the patient in DKA, transitioning out of DKA, or is the patient completely out of DKA? Next, it'll tell you what the insulin recommendations are, how much insulin drip rate should be at. Should it be discontinued? Should it be continued? Should it be at a certain rate or half that rate? It'll tell you those kind of results here. After that, it'll tell you what fluids you're on currently, and after that, the fluid recommendations of what you should be switching over to after you entered whatever data you entered, and clicked update recommendations. Um, and it might tell you some other information, and it'll give you this extra piece of information for corrected sodium if you're really interested in that. And lastly, it'll give you the diet of what kind of diet the patient should be on at the moment, in the current state that the patient is in. Usually it'll be NPO, but when you're trying to transition out of the DKA and into subcutaneous insulin, you'll have to start feeding the patient. So that's when you can start noticing some changes in the diet recommendations to feeding the patient a diabetic diet. So, just going back to the two important questions, there's only one big change that happens when you click some of these boxes. That box is, has the patient already been started on insulin, sub-Q insulin? And when you click that, you notice that the labs down here become very limited. You only have to enter the VBG, pH, the bicarb, and the anion gap. And the reason is, once you've started to transition somebody out of DKA onto the subcutaneous insulin protocols that the doctor guides you on, and that that this calculator will guide you on, you will have to do a BMP and a VBG check about 4 hours after transitioning them. And that's when you would just enter those simple pieces of data to determine if they're going backward into DKA or not. And once you enter those, you can click Update Recommendations. And once again, the recommendations will show whether you're in a current state of DKA or completely out of it and transition out of it, or what. And from there on, we'll follow the insulin and fluid recommendations, depending on if you successfully got the patient out of DKA after giving subcutaneous insulin. And that's it. You can always reach us if you have any more questions. Um, that's it. Thank you.